Hello, and welcome to Distant Echoes, Episode 11, Cardenas and the Grand Canyon. Last time we followed the Coronado expedition as they arrived at the Cibolan pueblo of Hawaku. From there they were met with disappointment, finding Fray Marcos's promises to have been false. This time we'll talk about some of the side adventures of the expedition. Meeting with disappointment, they set about exploring to try and find other leads, including visiting the Hopi Pueblos. At the Hopi Pueblos, the Spanish had heard rumors of a great river, and Coronado began to put together an expedition led by Cardenas that would leave on August 25th, 1540. Cardenas had orders to find this river and to explore it to its source, hopefully finding Alcoran, who was leading the naval component of the expedition. Coronado's vanguard was starting to run low on food, and he did not know how much he would be able to procure at Cibola long term. Cardenas was told to take no more than 80 days. Cardenas traveled to the Hopi Pueblos, where he was given supplies and guides. From here they were led over what was called quote-unquote uninhabited land for approximately 20 days, where they arrived at the settlements of the Havasupai. From there they traveled on to a large gorge, the Spanish writing the following, quote, "From whose brink it looked as if to the opposite end it must be more than 3 or 4 leagues by airline," end quote. From there they would, quote, "spend 3 days trying to find a way down to the river, which from above appeared to be only a fathom wide, although according to what the Indians said, it must be half a league across. The descent was found to be impossible, for at the end of these 3 days, Captain Melgosa and Juan Galeras and another companion, they being the lightest and most agile, undertook to clamber down at a place that appeared to them the least difficult. They kept descending in sight of the men until they were lost to view. At 4 o'clock in the afternoon they returned, without having been able to reach the bottom because of the great obstacles they encountered. For what from above had appeared easy proved to be, on the contrary, rough and difficult. They said they had been only a third of the way down. From the place they reached, the river looked very large. Indeed, judging from what they saw, it must be as wide as the Indians had said. 3 men who remained above estimated that some small rocks jutting out from the wall of the canyon must be about as high as a man. Those who went down swore that when they reached them, they were found to be taller than the highest tower of Sevilla. End quote. This gorge they were trying to cross, of course, is the Grand Canyon, probably somewhere in the vicinity of Grand View. After these 3 days, they were starting to run out of water and turned south. After a few days, they discovered that there wouldn't be much in the way of water if they continued, and that the Hopi usually stashed water along the way for the return trip for this stretch. They may have made it as far as Havasupai Canyon, but if they did not record the descent. They then began on their return trip. Meanwhile, back in Hawaku, Coronado was sending mixed messages about the mineral wealth he found. What little gold they had found had been previously brought by the Spanish. He requested more supplies and commented on the people, including that they had not seen many women. He sent Juan Gallegos back to deliver the message. Fray Marcos also decided to return at this point, possibly out of fear for his life, at least if you believe Castaneda's account. Melchor Diaz was also to accompany Gallegos back to the main army with orders for Arellano to continue on to Cibola. Some of his men would also establish a settlement on the Sonora River. Arellano had already advanced to Corazones like previously agreed upon. He then advanced up to Urez, where a city was founded. He then sent a short expedition to the Gulf to try and find Alarcon. They found nothing. Running low on supplies, they waited for the end of the rainy season before advancing to the area on Uwepac. Here, he met Gallegos. It was decided that Diaz and 80 men would remain where the city, named San Geronimo, was to be founded. At this point, they noted that the locals were becoming increasingly hostile. Here we'll leave Arellano and his men while they prepare to move north. We'll see what the elusive Alarcon had been getting up to while Coronado tried to find him. Alarcon had 2 ships in his fleet at the start of the expedition, outfitted with experienced crews. Among them was Domingo Castillo, who had mapped the Gulf of California with Ulloa about 1 year earlier. They had initially set out from Acapulco on May 9th. Shortly afterwards, they would get caught in a storm and throw some items overboard from one of the ships, when some of the men on board began to fear the whole thing was going to sink. He would stop at Santiago in Manzanillo Bay to repair the damage before returning to Culiacan to resupply, and obtaining another ship before he set out again, keeping a close eye on the coast for signs of Coronado. One must remember that the Spanish thought the coast curved to the east at this time. California was an island, and that the continent was far smaller than it actually was. On August 26, they had reached shallows in the Gulf. These shallows had turned to Ulloa back before. Here the ships would get caught in some shoals for a time, until the tides rose and the ships could get loose, allowing Alarcon to get loose and surpass the area explored by his predecessors. From here he would continue to sail up the coast, seeing no signs of Coronado and his men, who had yet to reach the Gulf. Eventually he would reach the mouth of the Colorado River. From here he would leave the ships behind with some men and take a series of launches up the river, hoping to find some signs of Coronado. These launches were mostly moved via cordeling, that is, by pulling them along by ropes, with men on the shore. Mostly they carried supplies and trade goods in the launches. Presumably they also used them as camps. Overall, Alarcon found the Cocopas, who called the river home, to be fairly friendly, although he did pose as a demigod son of the sun to ensure their cooperation. This was a common tactic among other conquistadors of the era as well. Along the way, he would also get an interpreter to travel with them. As he traveled north, as was the norm it seems, he heard ever grander stories about what they had at Cibola and how wealthy it was. Eventually, he would hear word of Coronado's arrival at Cibola. He decided to send a messenger to try and establish communication between the two parties. However, he could find no volunteers. So in typical fashion of the man, he decided that he would just have to do the job himself. However, at the moment he had sick men and was beginning to run low on supplies. Furthermore, he had been told that the people who lived further inland were hostile and were working to form a coalition to kill Christians. However, it is not believed that the Cocopas knew that Alarcon was a Christian at this point. Apparently, he had really leaned into the demigod persona he was putting on, and he had been relatively peaceful. Overall, among the expedition and all of its offshoots, Alarcon's little adventure is unique in that it was relatively peaceful. No settlement, no conquest, put it nicely as such. Quote, the relative calm that held between the Alarcon party and the native people it met, in contradistinction to the experience of the remainder of the Coronado expedition, is attributable to a number of circumstances. Most decisive were several practices the captain and his crew followed routinely, some purposeful and some without conscious forethought. Most conspicuous were gestures of non-belligerence mandated by the captain and scrupulously repeated by his crews. As Alarcon wrote afterwards about an early encounter on the Rio de Buenaguilla, the Colorado, I began to make signs of peace. Taking my sword and shield, I threw them onto the barca, which was beached, stepping my feet onto them, making the Indians understand by this and other signs I did not wish to make war with them, and that they should do the same. Having seized a banner, I lowered it and had the men I had also come sit down. End quote. Alarcon seems to have been a somewhat more autocratic leader than Vasquez de Coronado, and succeeded in achieving adherence to his general peaceful tactics. If Alarcon's own narrative can be believed, his force never expressly threatened and was never seriously threatened by the indigenous people it met. At the least hint of menace, Alarcon and his men withdrew. In his subsequent report, he put it this way, quote, I did not want to engage anyone, end quote. Alarcon's first action on encountering tribes was not a confrontational reading of the Requerimiento, as it was for other units of the Coronado expedition, which may have also helped ease tensions. Somewhere around Yuma, near the Colorado and Gila River junction, he decided to turn around. He erected a cross and buried some notes before he turned around to return to the ships, and then to Mexico. On the cross, he inscribed the following note, quote, Alarcon came this far. There are letters at the foot of this tree, end quote. Meanwhile, Melchior Diaz, who had been left in charge of San Geronimo, was trying to figure out how best to contact the wayward admiral. He decided to once again march to the coast and see if they could find any clues to his whereabouts. He left Diego de Alcaraz, whom, if you remember, had been the leader of the slave catchers that had met Cabeza de Vaca only 4 years earlier, in charge of the city. Meanwhile, he would set out with some 25 men, a dog, and some sheep to see if they could find any signs of the missing navy. With the expedition put together, he set out to the west, most likely traveling along what would become known as the Camino del Diablo. Eventually, they would reach the junction of the Gila and Colorado rivers, where they would find the cross Alarcon had left behind and the letters he had buried, revealing the man's return to Mexico. Hoping to catch the man before he returned, Diaz turned north to try and find a place to ford the river. When he found a place, he gave the local humans, who had been planning in it to attack, an opportunity. He had enlisted their help to build rafts. Luckily, if you're the Spanish at least, during the construction of the rafts, the plan was found out. The Spanish guard had seen a group of men sneaking around near the river, potentially trying to cross, and had captured one. Upon interrogation, the man spilled the beans, and revealed that the plan was to attack the Spanish while they were divided crossing the river. Knowing their plan was found out, the humans in the area instead launched a direct attack the next day. According to the Spanish, the attack was to no avail, and the humans were run down. Of course, no record exists of the other side's perception of the attack. With the battle over, he used the rafts that the humans had been planning to use instead to cross the river himself. From here, he continued towards the Gulf, even though Alcaran had probably left by now. But this is where disaster would strike. One day, sometime in December 1540, while at camp, the dog that had been brought along would begin to chase some of the sheep. Seeing this, Diaz would take his horse and chase after it to try and dissuade the dog. During the chase, he would throw his lance at the animal and miss. He would then run into this lance, which would pierce his groin. Unluckily for Diaz, he would survive the initial incident. The party would then hurry back towards San Geronimo as quickly as they could, trying their best to keep Diaz alive for the next 20 agonizing days. On the way back, they would be harried by native attacks. On January 18th, 1540, Diaz would die and be buried somewhere along the route. The party would then return to San Geronimo, which was also having problems. Several mutinies had been attempted, and Alcaraz had been forced to hang at least 2 of the men. He would send messages to Coronado, informing him of Diaz's death and the situation of the settlement. As for Alarcon, who would not find Coronado, he would stay at the mouth of the Colorado until October 1540, before he'd begin to set sail towards Mexico. He would stop frequently along the way and make small trips inland to look for any signs of Coronado. At Colima, he would briefly have an encounter with other Spaniards, who also had their own ambitions to the north, and would have to leave in the middle of the night. As soon as he got back, he started planning another expedition to find Coronado. In May 1541, he received his orders to proceed to find the expedition, and to found a settlement on the Colorado River. However, due to the outbreak of the Mixton War back in Mexico, he'd be called in to defend Spanish territory, where he would perish. With that, I think we'll leave the set of side trips that the Coronado expedition undertook behind, and bring this episode to an end. Next time, we'll see what Coronado had been up to. Before we launch into my usual outro, I just want to mention that I'm getting a chance to interview Ray Sandoval regarding Zozobra. If you have any questions regarding this annual festival in Santa Fe, please submit your questions to michael@engineeringfire.org or on the website by June 15th. If you enjoyed the show, please share it with your friends. Leave a review on your podcast app of choice if it lets you. Since I'm a Luddite and don't use social media, word of mouth and reviews are the only way the show spreads. We have a website located at engineeringfire.org. That's spelled engineeringfire.org, where I have a link in the header for podcast resources, including pictures, companion posts, my bibliography, and the transcripts of each show. We have an email you can submit comments and questions to at michael@engineeringfire.org. The intro music is Desperados by Frank Schroeder and sourced from filmmusic.io. The outro music is NeoWestern from Kevin McLeod of Incompetech. Links to all things mentioned are present in the show notes and at the website. And thank you all so much for listening, and I will see you in the next episode.